Hi everyone, I'm Carol Mertz. I'm the Executive Director of Pixelpop Festival, and I am so pleased to introduce our next session, Mindfulness Matters, presented by Sarah Spiers. Sarah is a game producer working currently at Filament Games in Madison, Wisconsin. She focuses on implementing mindfulness into her production process and advocates for sustainable development practices that promote mental wellness. Sarah also volunteers with the IGDA Foundation, serving as the program lead for the online diversity program, which grows and retains marginalized talent in the game industry. We're so happy to have her here. Take it away, Sarah.
Hey everyone, I hope you're having an excellent weekend. I am so excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about mindfulness today, more specifically, how we can improve our workplace culture and behavior through therapeutic skills. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Spiers, and I am the Program Director for the IGDA Foundation's Online Diversity Program. Previously, I worked with them as a program coordinator for the IGDA Scholars Program. During the day, I work at Filament Games as a producer, and I also contract with some other studios, most recently with Lonely Egg Studios. So before we can actually get into the skills part of things, we really need to talk about workplace culture and what it is. And when I ask people, what's your workplace culture? People usually describe it as like, we work hard and play hard. We're really whimsical and creative, really collaborative. And that's awesome, but that's not the whole picture. So what people are describing there, or what jobs will describe like in their description, or companies might describe on their website, is something called cognitive culture. And that is the intended thoughts and behaviors of employees. That's obviously not the full picture though. There's more to it, and that is where emotional culture comes into play. I'm gonna start over because I don't actually remember if I presented this correctly. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying your weekend. I am so excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about mindfulness today, more specifically, how we can improve our workplace culture and behaviors through therapeutic skills. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Spiers. I am the Program Director for the IGDA Foundation's Online Diversity Program. I previously was a program coordinator for their Scholars Program. During the day, I work at Filament Games as a producer, and I also contract with different studios, most recently with Lonely Egg Studios. So before we talk about skills and specific action items you can take, we do need to discuss what workplace culture is. When I ask people about their workplace culture, they usually describe things like, or they say things like, oh, we work hard, play hard, we're really ambitious, we're really creative, we're really collaborative. And that is culture. That is actually something called cognitive culture. It's the intended thoughts and behaviors of the employees at that workplace. However, it's not the full picture. The other part of this equation is something known as emotional culture, which are the intended or unintended feelings of the employees at a workplace. And these two cannot exist without one another. We just don't always talk about emotions, So let's look at some examples of how cognitive and emotional culture interact with each other. So in a workplace where the emotional culture is that of fear or anxiety, what happens is that you might think something like, I am so afraid of getting in trouble. Like, I don't want to get in trouble. And the behavior might be that you keep to yourself, you don't ask questions, you take up as little space as possible. And you don't have to have this go in that exact order. You might witness other people's behavior, which then influences your thoughts and feelings and then your behavior. So let's look at it from a more positive light, right? So if you're at a company whose emotional culture is joy or gratitude, you might think something like, I really love my teammates. They're awesome, they're talented, I really enjoy working with them. And you might express that joy and gratitude through behaviors like buying them coffee or making a public post on Slack saying that they're awesome and you appreciate them. Or you might just celebrate their success. Like maybe you have a little victory lunch with them. So this, this might look familiar to you, like this kind of cycle of emotional culture, cognitive culture, like feelings, thoughts, behaviors. And that is actually because feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are part of something known as the cognitive behavioral triangle. Wow. So this is something that's actually used in cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of explain how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors interact. So like in company culture, your feelings influence your thoughts, which influence your behaviors, which continue to influence your feelings, and vice versa. So in a therapy setting, a therapist and a patient might identify unhelpful behaviors or thoughts and try and disrupt this negative cycle. And they'll do this using different skills. And so this is very much the same in a workplace. You can actually use some of these techniques to kind of interrupt negative cycles and create a more positive environment. So the skill set we're actually going to draw from today is actually known as DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, which is part of CBT. I'm not going to get into it. It's like a really interesting but very in-depth topic. But what you need to know, more or less, is that DBT's foundation is mindfulness. Every skill that you learn in this type of therapy setting is basically all connected to this one core concept of mindfulness. So let's start there. What is mindfulness? So again, more questions. A lot of people think of meditation and yoga. Those are like the top two when I ask people. And you're right, that is that can be a way that you practice mindfulness. But DBT gives us the skills to kind of articulate what mindfulness is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the what's and the how's of mindfulness and how you can specifically implement them into your workplace practice. So here are the what's. The what's of mindfulness are what you can do to be mindful. So they're kind of like steps you take, essentially. So in an individual practice, you will observe first and foremost. So this is just noticing the feelings, the thoughts, and the urges that you're experiencing, the bodily sensations. So you might say, you know, oh, I'm angry, I have angry thoughts, you know, I really want to do, you know, something not productive, you know, my face is really flushed, that kind of thing, which is actually what you're doing at that point is describing, which is putting words to the experience, or as I like to say, name it to tame it. It's really important to kind of identify what's going on. It grounds you in the present, which is really what mindfulness is all about. And then last but not least, you participate. And that really just means sitting in that moment and not really doing anything, just observing and describing to yourself what's happening and not acting on any urges you have. So how do we bring this to your workplace? So here are some action items you can take. So the first thing that I always like to recommend to people is to implement moment to pauses, or just a moment to pause. So before, during, or after meetings, just take a moment for everyone to just sit there. And this is a great time for people to process things. You're gonna have some people who are intentionally sitting there thinking about everything that you talked about in that meeting. And then you have some people who are just gonna be like, oh, finally, we're done talking. And that's totally fine. Everyone's going to use that moment differently. But essentially, it can help you get through really tough conversations. Maybe you had a really intense discussion about how you're going to cut a feature and people have a lot of feelings. So this gives them an opportunity to kind of collect themselves. If you are a leader who can affect like an office setting, something you can do is set aside a serenity room or just a separate space where people do not work. They just collect themselves for a moment. A lot of places have something similar, but the important part is that you make sure that you and your colleagues are not using that as a quiet workspace. Really and truly, you want to separate it and make it a designated kind of like mindfulness space. And then another thing you can do is you can delay decisions. So this is like an extended moment to pause. So instead of forcing everyone to make a decision right when you've had a conversation, you set aside a separate time in the future to make a decision. And this is really beneficial in multiple ways, because one, you're letting people process things and giving them time to kind of just mull it over. But also you're making sure that all the key stakeholders are in the room. A lot of times when we rush decisions, we're leaving out marginalized voices. So this is an opportunity to have a more inclusive workspace as well. So Now let's talk about the hows of mindfulness. So this is how you can act mindfully. These are a little more complicated, so bear with me. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be non-judgmental or act non-judgmentally. This means when you want to avoid making something called evaluating judgments. And I know this is really hard because humans are hardwired to make judgments. It's how we've survived for so long. But there is a difference. So you want to avoid evaluating judgments and you want to make discerning judgments if you have to make judgments. So here's an example. Say you're at a restaurant and you are sitting next to a family that has 2 young kids, and those kids are running around and they're shrieking and they're really distracting. So an evaluating judgment is those parents are really bad parents because they can't get their kids to sit still. So that's an evaluating judgment because you're attributing kind of like a moral value to something or someone based off of a feeling, not a fact. A discerning judgment is something like, those kids are running around, those kids are really loud, I'm really frustrated, so I'm going to move. That's okay. That's a discerning judgment. You are literally just stating the facts. And when you are going back to the what's, when you're observing and describing, the non-judgmentally comes into play because you're saying, oh, this is a thought. You're not saying I am bad because of this thought. You're saying this is a thought, this is a feeling, it's happening, it just is what it is. So the next thing you're going to want to do when practicing the hows of mindfulness is you want to be one mindful. And this just means doing one thing at a time. When everyone says stop multitasking, this is kind of what that is. But if you want an example of it, it's like when you have a kid playing with Legos and you call them 5 times and they still don't come to dinner. It's because they're so in the zone. Ideally, we all want to be in the zone. It's like when you're on TikTok until 2 a.m. You're like, how did I get here? So that's an example of one mindfully. And then the last concept is effectively, which I like to say is probably the hardest one, at least for me. So to act effectively is basically to try and make the most informed, mindful decision you can possibly make, or just to behave in the most effective way when you can. And some guiding questions to help you do that is when you're in a situation, how important is it for you to maintain a relationship with another person? Is what you're doing legal or in line with the rules? Do the rules even make sense? How important is it for you to accomplish this goal? Does this actually matter? A great way to practice this individually or in a group setting, so at work, is to make a pro-cons list. Sounds super basic, but is actually really helpful. But let's kind of go into that group setting again. So what are some things we can do to bring the hows of mindfulness to our workplace? So the first thing you can do is to coach your team into making discerning judgments. So just capturing facts. So a great opportunity to do this is during retros or in one-on-one meetings. Just really, guide them into stating the facts. And if they are making evaluating judgments, you can ask them questions like, what happened to make you feel that way? It sounds like you're really frustrated. So what specific thing do you think caused that? And just kind of documenting those things. And those can help you make more effective decisions. Another thing you can do is set meetings with intentions. So if you find yourselves having conversations outside of work that really belong at work, actually schedule dedicated time to talk about things and providing an agenda so people can bring their best selves to that meeting. They can be super prepared. Another thing you can do is cultivate deliberate work time. I feel like a lot of us are doing this now that we're working from home. So just making sure you set boundaries when you work. If you are in charge of work schedules at all, if you're in that position of power, maybe designating no meeting hours so people can focus and be one mindful in their work. Similarly, designating workspace. So if you are working from home, this can be really hard. Like I live in an apartment where I work in my living room, which is not ideal. But just having like a space that is specifically for work is great. And if you do eventually go back to an office space, it's really helpful to look for places that have like a break area versus a work area, because when people start having really fun and engaging conversations in the middle of our workspace, it can become really distracting. And then last but not least, if you are a company leader and you have the opportunity to do this, please look into opportunities to support your employees through their health benefits. So looking at gym memberships where there are mindfulness classes, actually bringing someone to do yoga like on site, or like a mindfulness coach on site, that's really awesome. And I want to say this and make a point of this. It's all well and good to have these things available, but I believe that leadership is also like using these things and showing your employees that it's important to you through using that. And then people will be more likely to also participate as well if they see leadership doing these things. So anyway, so these are some of the action items you can take to implement mindfulness, but obviously they're a little more foundational and structural. Sometimes though, you're gonna really need to take direct action and like interrupt that cycle. So if you think back to that cognitive behavioral triangle, you've got feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Sometimes you have to actually intervene at the behavioral and thought level. So let's talk about how you can do that. Okay, so introducing a skill called screwing the problem. So DBT, for the record, is full of acronyms, and the rest of this presentation is going to have some acronyms. It's really helpful for remembering things, just trust me. So in a workplace, we often find ourselves in situations where people have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right? And really and truly, these things can be boiled down to 5 ways. You know, people react to things in 5 ways. So let's go through them, and then I'll talk about how you can kind of use this as a skill in the workplace. So screwing the problem. Screw is how you react to things. So S is solving the problem. So, okay, let's set up a situation. So let's say you're late to work, you didn't get to have coffee in the morning, you're really tired. So solving the problem is when you get to work and you see that there's no coffee, you make another pot of coffee. Simple, you solve the problem. C is changing relationship to the problem. So you get to work, there's no coffee, you're like, you know what, I just need caffeine. I'm just gonna go get some tea. Or maybe you will like walk to the coffee shop and you just pay a little extra for coffee. Cool, you change your relationship to the problem. The next step is to radically accept. And this one's the hardest, y'all, because it is essentially saying, it is what it is. I don't agree with it. This really sucks, but I can't change the situation. So it's radically accepting. Now, the next 2 are known as U's, and they're called U's because you generally want to avoid them. Now, I have an asterisk in that statement because sometimes there are situations where it's appropriate to do these things, but in the workplace, it's generally kind of frowned upon because usually you're negatively impacting people around you. So in this example where you don't have coffee, you can entertain misery by complaining to your coworkers for the full first hour of work that you don't have coffee and you are miserable. And then you can also worsen the problem by, you know, throwing the empty coffee canister out a window or yelling at a coworker who got to work before you but didn't make coffee. That isn't super great. So when you're in a leadership position and you're working with people individually, it can be really helpful to actually sit down and try and figure out where they are. So if there's like a disagreement at work, you can try and figure out where they are on this screw scale, I suppose. That's a really weird phrase. Probably would not use that. But you can kind of figure out how they're approaching the problem. Are they trying to solve it? Are they changing the relationship? Are they worsening it? How can we bring them back to the scruz and avoid the U's? A thing that I like to do with my teams is when we have a really difficult client meeting or we have to make a cut or just people are having a really like tough time for whatever reason, I like to sit down and just write screw. And then we think of all the different ways we can react to things. So we'll start at the bottom and we're like, how could we make this worse? And we write that down. Then we go to the E and we go, how could we entertain misery? And then we write that down and we work our way all the way up to the top. And usually people are like really excited and eager to try and solve the problem or change their relationship to the problem. And it's really exciting as a producer in particular to see your team come to a conclusion and own their own success. That is one skill that I like to use and that I recommend for other people, but sometimes this can be a little challenging. And so these next 2 skills are ways that you can kind of accomplish elevating people to get to the scruz. This next skill is known as give. In DBT, it's known as a way to connect with other people and build stronger relationships. It's really just a framework of how to interact with other people mindfully to get the best results possible. So you're being effective, more or less. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to be gentle in your language. And this means avoiding really intense words or phrases. So avoid saying things like, I hate it when, or I love it, or I adore. Just really think about the intensity of the message in relation to the intensity of the situation. The stronger you come off, the more defensive the person might be, whether you're making a request or giving constructive feedback or even praise. Think about the intensity and what's appropriate. The next thing is to be interested, which goes back to the how of mindfulness, which is one mindfully. So it goes back to that. This is just putting your phone away when you're having a conversation, being respectful of people's time and effort, and not having really important conversations in the middle of the kitchen where people are playing Mario Kart and you're kind of like half watching them and half talking to someone. So be really interested in what they're saying. And the next thing is to validate. And this one can be really difficult for people who maybe are not in touch with their emotions or who tend to devalue emotions. So it's really important for us to validate other people's feelings. So when we're building a healthier workplace, it's important to acknowledge that feelings exist. Remember, they're part of emotional culture. You do not have to agree with someone's emotions, but you just need to validate it. So what you can do when you talk to people is you can say, yeah, I can totally see how that would be really frustrating. And that's the way you can validate without agreeing. And if you really don't understand, you can be like, wow, you seem really upset. Can you help me understand what's going on? Just being curious and approaching it with empathy, which kind of brings me to my last point for give, which is to have an easy manner, which is really, really hard. Especially when we're on Zoom, because you can only see like this much of us. So for an easy manner, you want to not clench your jaw, which I really struggle with. When you're in person, you might want to have like palms up. There's like a phrase that we use, which is half smile, willing hands. Also like not crossing your legs, not clenching your fists, not tensing up, just being, easy and casual, because the more tense you feel, the more that they're going to perceive that something's wrong. So when you're communicating with people and when you're like practicing screwing the problem, make sure that you're, using give to kind of guide you on how you're communicating with others, and also use it to help observe what other people are doing. Are they acting with an easy manner? Are they being gentle right now? That helps you kind of evaluate where they are. So final skill, because we're running out of time here, is Dear Man. So this is actually my favorite skill. And whenever I talk to people kind of about mindfulness and skills and DBT, this happens to be everyone's favorite. So super pumped to share it with you. So Dear Man is essentially asking for what you want. It's a really great framework for being like, hey, I need this thing. So let me walk you through it. So D stands for describe. So this is literally going back to the non-judgmentally. It's making, if you're going to make a judgment, a discerning judgment. So just stating the facts. So like, we had a really tough client meeting. We had a client meeting that upset a lot of people. There you go. That is a fact. It upset a lot of people. Expressing is the I statement. So when we talk about communicating with people and not accusing them, you want to use an I statement. So during the client meeting, I felt really overwhelmed because I had to explain the new design and I'm not as acquainted with it as you are. Maybe not the best way of phrasing it, but that's an example. Then asserting is basically stating what you need in a confident way. So, during the client meeting yesterday, we were really upset. I had to explain a design concept to the client that I wasn't really familiar with. And I would really appreciate it if next time you would explain it, since you're a little more acquainted with it. And then the reinforce part is explaining why it's beneficial. And you could say something like, I really would appreciate if you would explain the design concept to the client since you're more familiar with it. That way the client feels more confident in what we are proposing and I appear less flustered. Something like that. It's not a perfect example, but it kind of explains how you break it down. So really and truly you're saying, here's what happened. Here's how I felt about it. Here's what I need. And here's why you should care. And really and truly, if you're going to have a conversation with an employee, just saying like, hey, like I need, I need this behavior to change, you can also use this. And going back to give, you want to make sure that you're choosing your language deliberately. You want to make sure that you're having an easy manner. You want to make sure you're actually validating how they feel, regardless of how you feel. And then also just paying attention to them. So then now going on to the man part, wow, mindful. You want to stay mindful. You want to go back to the what's in the house and practice that, and really think about like, how are you being effective? Are you being judgmental? Are you fully paying attention, investing in this present moment? A is a pure confidence. So this is saying like, hey, this is what I need. Watching your body language, because if you're talking about what you need, but you're shaking, some people may not take it seriously, unfortunately. And then last but not least is negotiate. So this is just willingness to meet someone halfway. And, this whole thing may seem pretty, straightforward, and that it's something that, Dearman is a skill we should all know and have, but a lot of people don't have it. And really guiding your coworkers into this kind of format for asking for things and guiding them into acting mindfully can be really helpful ways to improve overall company morale. So I know I've gone through this really quickly, and I know that we have a limited amount of time. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for listening to this conversation. I would totally love to continue it. I think we're all going to be heading over to the Pixelpop Discord. So if you have any questions about how you can specifically implement one of these things into your workplace, just ask. And if you don't feel comfortable talking in Discord, if you have questions later, feel free to contact me in one of these 3 ways. I am basically online all the time. But again, thank you so much. I hope you learned something helpful today, and I hope you have a great rest of your Pixelpop experience.
Thank you so much to Sarah for that amazing, thoughtful presentation. And thank you all for watching. Please be sure to head over to our Pixelpop Festival community Discord server at discord.gg/pxp, where we're going to be continuing the discussion, and we'll have an opportunity to participate in live Q&As in our breakout rooms, and you'll be able to become a part of our greater community. Now, stay tuned, because you're not going to want to miss our next batch of games, which include Garden Story and She Dreams Elsewhere.